Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. I do love exploring humanoid cases. It's probably my favorite aspect of ufology, that and onboard UFO encounters. I have plenty of more cases of that kind to share with you. But today I'd like to talk about close encounters of the second kind. The title of today's episode is called We Were Frozen in Time, 10 Truly Bizarre Close Encounters of the Second Kind. I've got 10 cases from all over the world, including Canada, France, Germany, Tasmania, as well as 6 from the United States, including Arizona, Florida, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Ohio, and Washington. What's really interesting about UFO encounters is that the most common type of encounter is, of course, a close encounter of the first kind, a simple sighting. And there are literally millions of cases that have been documented coming from all over the world and really stretching back to prehistory. A close encounter of the second kind is an encounter in which the physical environment is affected in some way. These cases have a lot to teach us. There's still a lot of questions surrounding some of these encounters. So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, a close encounter of the third kind is, of course, involving humanoids. A close encounter of the fourth kind is being taken on board. And now we have a close encounters of the fifth kind, human-initiated encounters. This was a classification system invented by J. Allen Hynek to really help us understand what's going on here. It can be a little confusing because, let's face it, a close encounter of the fourth kind, being taken on board, really involves an encounter of the first, second, and third kind. And there are close encounters of the first kind involving telepathy, so where would you categorize that? It can be a little confusing. At any rate, close encounters of the second kind are a category that deserves a lot of attention because these cases have some really interesting aspects to them that, again, we still don't fully understand. 10 cases I've got today reach from 1963 all the way to 2002, and I think you'll find them amazing, fascinating, and just as interesting, actually, as some of these humanoid encounters. So let's just get started. In the first case I'd like to talk about today, I call It Was Watching Us. This occurred on November 23rd, 1963 in Mattagami River. This is in Ontario, Canada. This is a very unusual encounter. What I like about this case is it involves two independent sets of witnesses. So this is incredible confirmation, and it's a very close encounter involving some quite unusual physiological effects. This case comes from prolific researcher Brian Veik. The primary witness is anonymous, so I'll call him Wade, but the case actually involves quite a few witnesses. It began around 10 a.m., a cold but bright sunny morning on November 23rd, 1963, as Wade and his friend Robert began their daily walk to school. Arriving at school, they were surprised to find that it was closed in honor of President Kennedy, who sadly had just been assassinated one day earlier. But now with the day off, the boys decided to go to Robert's house. At the time, they were living in a temporary construction community located along the Mattagami River in northern Ontario, Canada. This was about midway between James Bay and Kapuskasing in Ontario. At the time, the boys' fathers were working on building 3 hydroelectric dams, Little Long, Kipling, and Harmon, all located along the Mattagami River. And once at Robert's house, they sat on his back step practicing playing guitar. They were near the Smoky Falls Dam area, just north of Little Long Dam, which overlooked a road known then as Smoky Falls Road. There was a grove of trees on the other side of the road about 200 feet away. And I'll just let Wade describe what happened. As he says in his own words, "As we sat there, with Robert strumming away, I looked up and across the road. I never heard or noticed it arriving, but there it was, just sitting there, about 10 feet higher than the tallest tree in the first grove, which would put it about 30 feet off the ground. I jabbed Robert with my elbow and pointed. We just sat there in silence watching it, as it was watching us. It was huge, the diameter about 30 yards. From top to bottom at the center, the dimension was at least, and maybe greater than the height of the trees, 6 or 7 yards in thickness. It appeared to be constructed of dull aluminum and was shaped like a saucer, with the exception that the top and bottom halves did not join in a sharp edge. All the way around the center, it looked like dark windows, 6 feet tall. As Robert and I watched, the craft tilted with the closest side to us down and the rear of the saucer up. It appeared that whoever was inside was trying to get a better look at us. It shifted back down to its original position and then drifted at low speed to the west and behind the trees. The total observation time was 1 minute, although it seemed longer at the time. This was no blinking, flashing light in the corner of the sky. This was a saucer, up close and personal. So Wade and Robert were amazed, and that was the last they saw of this saucer. But it was not the last time that they heard about it, because after their encounter, this same craft apparently had more witnesses to visit. As Wade says, 2 or 3 nights after the encounter, my father received a phone call at home. I recall him being so angry as he grabbed the keys for the company truck and headed out. Construction workers need light to work by when the sun goes down, and Dad had electricians running the diesel-powered lightning plants. 3 electricians had just walked off the job and refused to return, claiming that they had come under attack by a low-flying saucer. One of the electricians claimed to have thrown a hammer at the saucer as it took a low pass at him, and according to him, he hit it. Dad radioed for another crew to take over the position and was driving the electricians back to the construction camp, but had to stop often, as one of the fellows was violently sick. The next morning the sick fellow went to the clinic, and the doctor and nurses applied cream and then bandaged him top to bottom to soothe and cover his burned, blistered skin. It was the talk of the town for a while, as folks puzzled over getting that bad of a sunburn while fully clothed, working for the night shift. How interesting is that? I don't think anyone can truly understand what it's like to see a UFO until you actually have that experience. And skeptics can say anything they want, but once someone sees something like that close up, they know. They've moved from beyond belief or disbelief to actual first-hand experiential knowledge. And when someone reports being, affected physiologically, like having a sunburn all over their body from a close approach of a UFO, well, there you go. That's absolute amazing evidence that is very hard to explain away. So now let's move to the next case. This one is absolutely bizarre. I call this one very terrifying. This one occurred on July 30th, 1968 in Claremont, New Hampshire. This is a multiple witness case, and some of the effects, the secondary effects, are really unusual. There's animal reactions, of course, but to me, it's what happened to this couple's children that really makes me wonder what's going on here. It's a crazy case. This case, or rather 2 clearly related cases, comes from NICAP researcher Gordon Lohr, and both were published in his book, Strange Effects from UFOs. It also appeared in the June-July 1968 issue of the NICAP publication, UFO Investigator. It all began at 1 a.m. on July 30th, 1968, when a man, employed at a manufacturing plant, was carrying 2 buckets of water to his garden located outside his home in Claremont, New Hampshire. Looking up, he saw a, quote, bright round object float in a gentle arc low in the sky to the northeast. He said it was about the same size of a full moon, but clearly not the moon, and it was flying, he said, at an extremely low altitude. After it disappeared behind some trees, he rushed back into his apartment and noted the time as 1:12 a.m. Now, meanwhile, just 2 miles away, a married couple was in their new home in Claremont. The husband, I'll call him Cliff, was a land surveyor. His wife is also anonymous, so I'll call her Vera. They had just moved into their house and worked late at various tasks, including working in their rock garden. They were in their bedroom and still awake at around 1:30 or 2 a.m., along with their pet poodle. Their children were asleep in another bedroom, and their German Shepherd dog was in the garage. And this is when they noticed weird lights outside, which they first assumed were the northern lights. But going to the other window, they saw more lights, which they now thought might be people walking around with flashlights. But looking more closely, they realized it was something much stranger, a dome-shaped object about 20 feet wide hovering outside their home. They said it was only 10 feet above the ground and about 230 feet away, they estimate. It was sending down a beam of light from the central undersection of the craft, and in this beam of light there was a sort of arm-like device reaching down to the ground or towards the ground. It was making a very loud buzzing noise, and no sooner did they notice this object when they also noticed strange reactions with both their dogs and their children. And although the children were still asleep, they were acting very strangely. As Vera, the mother, says, "Our children were very restless. They were moaning as if something was hurting them. They were actually crying out in their sleep. The children are both quiet sleepers, and once they are in bed, they do not wake up unless they are sick." So it was clear that they were reacting somehow to the presence of this UFO, and so were the dogs. As Vera says, "My poodle was most upset. He sleeps in our bedroom, and he pawed the side of the bed until I put him in bed with us. He was actually shaking from being so upset. But my fear for the children was what upset me most. I kept saying to my husband, what is going to happen to the poor children if someone should come into the house?" So after a few very long minutes, this object moved about 25 feet to the east, but then it remained there for the next 2 hours. Now, having just moved into this house, the couple had no telephone, and they became increasingly frightened by this strange spectacle. Both felt, as they said, quote, isolated and terrified. The husband actually wanted to leave and drive for help, but his wife refused to let him leave. And during all this time, this object continued to make this high-pitched buzzing noise. Vera says, "During this time, I thought of all kinds of things. I kept hearing sounds throughout the house. Any other night, they wouldn't have meant a thing, but tonight, they were most terrifying." Now finally, at 4:30 a.m., the humming sound became louder, the light from the craft grew brighter, and the object finally moved off to the west, going over the treetops and disappearing off into the distance. It took them a few hours to calm down, at which point the husband drove to the Claremont police station and reported the incident to Police Captain Ernest M. Faust, who reported this case to NICAP, which is how it became to be investigated. And as Vera says, "Our experience was very terrifying, and I hope that it never happens again. However, if it should, I hope that my husband and I will be prepared by then to handle the matter in a better way." There you go, another case with two sets of independent witnesses. The gentleman seeing the UFO just a few miles away before this couple did. But what's going on with their children? Makes me feel like there was perhaps some level of telepathic contact there. Very hard to say. I'd love to talk to the children and see if they remember anything from that night. An hours-long encounter, too. That I can see why the witnesses felt that this was very scary for them, even though clearly they weren't harmed. But an absolute amazing case that not a lot of people know about. There's so many cases that are just being completely lost to posterity because the vast majority of people do not report them. Now here's another case that I'm quite sure you haven't heard about, but it's definitely worthy of being well known. I call this one Pulled Over by a UFO. This occurred in January of 1969, perhaps 1970. The witness isn't exactly certain about the date. This occurred in Lake Wales, Florida, one evening. And this is a scene straight out of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I'm not sure this would qualify as a close encounter of the second kind, but it's so interesting and unusual, I just had to include it. I've given the main witness in this case the pseudonym Brett. He is anonymous, and it was one evening in late January 1969, or perhaps 1970, that Brett decided to drive to his father's house in Lake Wales, Florida. His father lived only 6 miles away, so it wasn't a long drive, and was one he had done many times. But on this occasion, something really remarkable happened. It was about 7 p.m. He had turned left on Highway 60 on a rural road, and as Brett says in his own words, "As I was about halfway there, I saw revolving blue lights in my rearview mirror. As I was in the city limits of town, I thought naturally that it was the local police pulling me over for a traffic violation. I thought perhaps I had been speeding or something. So I pulled over and stopped. At that moment, the interior of my pickup was flooded with light. I looked rearward and was shocked to find no one there. No police car, nothing. I then looked to my immediate right, and I saw an immense object just sitting there over a citrus grove. The craft was exceedingly close, about 50 yards off to my right, and about a telephone pole's height from the ground level. It was very luminous and quite large, and with a typical saucer shape, like two saucers put together. I had the distinct impression that it was observing me, and I felt like they wanted me to see it. To say that I was apprehensive was a bit of an understatement. It was an absolutely beautiful craft. It was huge. I estimate about 50 to 75 yards in diameter. It was well enveloped in light, which didn't seem to radiate outward much, if at all. It appeared to be made of a metal similar to aluminum, bright and shiny, and there was absolutely no sound whatsoever. Brett had always been interested in UFOs, and he had read several accounts of so-called abductions, so he was understandably nervous about this close presence of the UFO. As he says, "I was scared stiff. I felt that my best recourse would be to leave. After I left, I looked back, and it was gone. I don't know, but for a long time after that, I couldn't seem to tell anyone about it, like it wasn't important or something. I didn't have any missing time, so I'm quite sure I wasn't abducted. But another strange thing about this is that the UFO, or whatever it was, didn't arrive and leave in the conventional manner. It just appeared and then disappeared. Poof, gone. It was the most vivid thing I've ever seen. There were several things about this sighting that to me were peculiar. The first was the use of police lights. The UFO used simulated police lights to pull me over, and then apparently sat there observing me. The second was the fact that this happened in a well-populated area. A church and a hospital were nearby, as well as in a residential area. I shall never forget it. I think my sighting is very unique in that I was pulled over by a UFO. It was almost on top of my truck. They were observing me and had forced me to pull over. Sometimes I wish I could see it again." So yeah, I'm not sure that would qualify as a close encounter of the second kind, but let's face it, it did affect the environment in terms of the witness himself. And that has to be intentional. I mean, gosh, this UFO coming down right behind somebody and mimicking police lights. It's very much like what happened to Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I do know of other cases like that. It's kind of an amusing case, but I'm sure for the witness at the time, he was not laughing. Maybe now he is, but so unusual. Now let's move to the next case, which I call "It Was Looking for Me." This one does qualify as a close encounter of the second kind because the witness was struck by a beam of light which rendered him unable to move. This absolutely affected him physiologically. It's a good example of the so-called Oz effect as well. This one occurred on July 25, 1970 in Jabray-les-Bourdes in France. And this one is interesting to me because this gentleman stumbles upon a UFO in a pretty isolated area. And again, as the title suggests, he feels that it was looking for him. This case first appeared in the August 1971 issue of the French UFO magazine Lumière dans la Nuit, or Lights in the Night. And in fact, it was the cover story. The witness is known only as Etienne G. He was 16 years old at the time of his encounter, working as a baker's apprentice in the commune of Jabray-les-Bourdes in Haute-Vienne, France. It was on the afternoon of July 25, 1970, that he decided to go hiking to collect some edible mushrooms in the countryside near his home in the village of Les Bourdes. Having grown up there, he was very familiar with the terrain and the woods. He reached an area about 700 meters from his home, less than a half mile, known as P for No, Little Furnace. You can see it here. It's a small hill about 480 meters high, 1,500 feet. It's a very lush, verdant area, thick with trees and ferns, and in fact the ferns were almost as tall as ATN himself. He measured 5.5 feet tall. It was around 5:30 p.m. and the sun was growing low on the horizon as ATN was climbing down the western slope of this small hill when he noticed a metallic-looking dome right in front of him, no more than 15 meters away, less than 50 feet. It was sitting among the ferns right in front of a grove of fir trees. Now, ATN knew that there were no structures there, so he stopped in shock. But he was also intrigued and curious, so he took a few more steps forward and used his walking stick to pull the ferns apart so he could get a better view. And the moment he did this, he was instantly dazzled by a very bright yellow-orange light emanating from the object, or rather from 3 rectangular squares located immediately below the top dome. Now the light was so bright it was difficult for him to see the object clearly, but he could just discern that there appeared to be a wider, lower, saucer-shaped section below the lights. Now he compared the texture or the color of this object to a wrapper of a chocolate bar, in other words, silver. So ATN's initial curiosity now turned to fear as he found himself utterly immobilized by the light. Although he wanted to flee, he was unable to move forward or backwards. He just stood there with his right foot placed forward, exactly where it was when he parted the ferns. He was still able to move his eyes, and the glare from the light was almost blinding, as he says, as if it were coming from a lighthouse. And he had the distinct impression that, as he says, it was looking for me. Now he's not sure how long this part of his experience lasted, because he said he seemed to have lost all sense of time. He did notice that the orange-yellow beams of light had a very thin green beam in the center. He also noticed that everything seemed to be unusually quiet and still. Then, after an undetermined period of time, the craft began to rise upwards, the beam left his body, and he could now get a clear view of the craft and could also move. He could now clearly see the narrow dome on top of the craft, below that a row of 3 or 4 squarish windows, and below that a wider saucer shape with what looked like 3 or 4 circular portholes around the circumference. He estimates it was about 5 to 6 meters or 15 to 20 feet wide and about 2.5 to 3 meters high, 7 to 9 feet, really about the size of a van. He did also notice 3 short antennae on top, and very quickly this craft moved off into the distance and disappeared. That's the kind of case that raises a lot of questions for me. What was that UFO doing there? Was it waiting for this gentleman? Was this a random encounter? Why did it strike him with this beam of light? Was he truly paralyzed by the beam of light, or was this more of a sort of frozen in fear response? Because I think that does take place in a lot of these cases. People assume they're immobilized, but at some point break free. They absolutely kind of overcome the fear, perhaps, and are able to run away. I don't know. Very hard to say, but I think that these are the kinds of cases we need to take a closer look at, because these kinds of questions need to be answered. We don't know the answer to a lot of these weird effects that people are having with close encounters. Now let's move to this next case. This one is absolutely bizarre and incredible. I call this one, We Were Missing for a Day. This occurred in September 1973 in Mansfield, Ohio. 1973 has been called the year of the humanoids, and towards the end of the year, September and October, the number of cases in this area was off the charts. This case doesn't involve humanoids, but it's very close to the very famous Captain Coyne incident with a helicopter which was apparently lifted by a UFO, levitated to some degree. A lot of cases in this area at that time, and this one is so unusual for a number of reasons. This case, which involves 2 teenage witnesses, has not been formally investigated, but one of the witnesses is now a police captain, and he has provided his first-hand eyewitness testimony of a really remarkable UFO encounter which involves what appears to be 24 hours of missing time. As he is anonymous, I'll use the pseudonym Elliot. It was one afternoon in September or October of 1973. Elliot, then age 16, and his 13-year-old younger sister had just been dropped off the school bus in front of their home on Cook Road. This is in suburban Mansfield, Ohio. You can see it here. This area was a busy 2-lane road with homes on either side of the road, about a half block from a school and a convenience store. So a pretty populated area. And I'll just let Elliot describe what he saw. As Elliot says, I had exited the bus before my sister and stood waiting for her on the sidewalk. As she stepped from the bus and it pulled away, I was startled to see a large object hovering over the street where the school bus had been. I pointed it out to my sister, and we both stood, captivated by its appearance and proximity. The craft was approximately 40 feet long and 15 or 20 feet tall. It hovered silently, 35 or 40 feet overhead, and had lights encircling its cigar-shaped structure. I believe there was a larger red light on one end and a green light on the other, but the rest of the smaller lights were multicolored. It was of a metal which looked like brushed aluminum and had no visible means of levitation or propulsion, no wings, no propellers. I walked into the street underneath the craft and across the street to see it from the other side. There were no numbers or letters of any kind displayed, and I could not see any seams for the release of landing apparatus. At one point, I picked up a rock to hear what it would sound like bounced against the exterior, but my sister dissuaded me from throwing it. We became increasingly distressed, as I was not able to identify this object, and by the fact that we were alone. So Elliot and his 13-year-old sister just stood there and stared at this craft in astonishment, confusion, and some disbelief for the next 15 minutes. And they did notice a few very odd details. As Elliot says, it had been at least 15 minutes since we first saw the craft, and during this time, remarkably, no one had passed by. No one came out onto their front porch, no other kids walked the sidewalks, and no cars drove by. In retrospect, this seems absurd given the time of day and the usual traffic on Cook Road. We walked around and underneath the craft for 15 or 20 minutes, while it remained motionless and soundless above what should have been a busy suburban street. When I returned to the side of the street on which my sister stood, I now saw a small black oval slightly above the row of lights. We thought it might be a window and waved, but there was no response. Several minutes later, the craft silently shot up and into a small cumulus cloud which drifted away. So at this point, Elliot's sister turned to him and asked, "What was it?" And Elliot replied, "I don't know. Do you think it could be one of those UFOs the paper's been writing about?" So neither of them knew what it was, but the biggest shock was yet to come. As Elliot says, we were both excited and scared as we walked into our house, whereupon we both completely forgot about it. Although we had no apparent memory of the event, I recall that we were both very upset with our mother, whom we accused of leaving us for a 24-hour period. Mom insisted she had never done such a thing, but we were convinced we had experienced a full 24 hours without her. Now, for a few years, the entire encounter was shrouded in complete amnesia. But one day, by sheer synchronicity, Elliot spontaneously recalled the encounter. As he says, we both completely forgot this incident for 3 years. 3 years after our encounter, I had a sudden recall of the events described above while talking about the cosmos with some college friends. I called my sister and asked her if she had ever seen a flying saucer, and at first she said no, but when I mentioned the school bus in Ohio, she also had a sudden realization and literally gasped on the phone. Her memory of the event is almost exactly like my own, including the little window and the strange missing time. The missing time was particularly perplexing to both of us, and to this day remains a disturbing reality. I know I am missing a day, but I cannot explain it. Both of us felt, then and now, that we are missing a 24-hour period of our lives. I'm still fearful of what I saw, but I am more afraid of what I cannot remember. I suppose I'm just pretty damned average in every way, except for this nagging experience which continues to haunt me. Now, Elliot does admit that there are a few other very unusual events in his life, which are certainly related. He recalls that he used to tell, quote, strange stories of little men when I was very young. But as he says, life goes on. But I sure wish I could understand the whats and whys of this event. As we know, missing time as the result of a UFO encounter is not unusual, but generally speaking, it's anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour or two, and perhaps longer, but 24 hours, that's crazy. I really wonder about this case because this UFO appeared exactly as these children were coming off the bus, as if it was waiting for them. It hung there for a long time. Where was all the traffic? This is a really good example of the strange Oz effect. There should be traffic and people going up and down this pretty busy street. Where were they? I suspect that they were pulled perhaps into the fourth dimension. I don't know, I'm speculating here. But we have to account for these weird effects, and they're still not fully understood. It's also interesting that not only were they missing 24 hours, they completely forgot about the UFO encounter for a couple of years until just by chance the brother spontaneously recalled this. So that makes me wonder how many people have had an encounter like this and don't really remember it at all because it's just buried in amnesia. An amazing case, which raises all kinds of questions. Now let's move to the next case. This one is so unusual. I have never heard anything like this in terms of effects on a witness. I call this one Scared Straight by a UFO. It's not what you're thinking, I'm guessing. I'd be surprised if you've heard of this case. The physical effects on the witness are, again, so bizarre. This one occurred on September 22nd, 1974 in Launceston. This is in Tasmania, Australia. This is a very close encounter, and I think you'll find this incredibly fascinating because of what happened to this witness. This case comes from Paul B. Jackson, MUFON Research Associate for Tasmania and the co-founder of the Tasmanian UFO Investigation Center. It appeared in the January 1975 issue of MUFON's Skylook Journal. The witness is known only as Mrs. W. Late on the afternoon of September 22, 1974, she was on Diddleham Road in the Tayenne area, about 30 miles northeast of Launceston, Tasmania, Australia. She was in her car and had pulled off the narrow road to wait for a relative to arrive. She was listening to her radio, which just announced that the time was 5:20 p.m., so she knew the exact time, when suddenly a brilliant bright light coming from outside the car illuminated the interior. At that same moment, the radio began to emit a high-pitched whistle. So Mrs. W. leaned forward with the intention of turning off the radio, and looking up through the windshield, she now saw the source of the illumination, because up above the hill on the left side of the road, there was a glowing orange and silver object maneuvering between two trees and coming down the hill towards her and the road. Now, seeing that this object was heading straight for her, Miss W. panicked, and leaving the radio on in her haste, she started up the car and started backing up the road. This object approached slowly. She could now see that it was about the size of a large car. It was about 50 to 60 feet above the ground and descending as it came down towards the road. By the time it came over the road, it was only 5 feet above the road and about 60, maybe 90 feet away. The car radio was still making this same whining noise. Mrs. W. had backed up her car about 300 feet, at which point it became stuck on the edge of the road. The UFO now hovered stationary above the road ahead of her for about 60 seconds. She could see it perfectly, except that the glare from the upper dome of the craft was so bright it made it difficult to look at. She could see it had a dome on top, but the orange-yellow light coming from it was really bright that she had trouble estimating its size, Beneath the dome, she could see that the craft was metallic, silver gray. It had a wide brim with what looked like portholes. And below this, there were a half a dozen bands encircling the object. This section was about 12 feet wide, she estimates, and at the base, in the center, was a small revolving disc, and below this she could see a box or a tube of some kind protruding from the bottom of the craft. So after hovering, the craft then dipped over to the right and moved away from the road over a valley to the southwest. Then it suddenly went straight up very quickly and disappeared into the distance. As it moved off, it looked like the tube object on the bottom split into 4 sections, and Miss W estimates that the entire encounter lasted about 4 minutes. A pretty interesting sighting, but there were some very interesting and truly bizarre after effects. One was that the radio, which had worked perfectly prior to the encounter, no longer worked properly, and the sound that came out of it was permanently distorted. Prior to the encounter, the car was very dirty. In fact, there were cat footprints all over the front hood. But following the encounter, the front half of the car looked as though it had been professionally polished clean, while the back half remained as dirty as before. But the third and most bizarre effect, Miss W noticed immediately. She had just had her hair freshly permed into curls, but following the encounter, her permed hair turned immediately straight. The only other effects was that Mrs. W was so emotionally shaken by the encounter that she was sick for a number of days afterwards. Prior to this sighting, she had never believed in UFOs, but following the encounter, of course, she changed her mind and became a believer. Investigators did check the area for any marks or magnetic variations, but nothing was found. Interestingly, the RAAF also showed interest in the encounter and interviewed the witness personally. Ultimately, investigators concluded that Mrs. W had seen something truly unconventional and that she had a, quote, low-level daylight sighting of an unexplained aerial object. That absolutely qualifies as a close encounter of the second kind. There must be some energy field surrounding these craft that allowed this woman to have her hair straightened. How weird is that? Also, it cleaned her car, so I don't know. Very odd. I've never heard anything quite like it. I've heard of areas being swept clean of dust and things like this, and strange effects on cars as well. But I've never heard of anyone's hair being straightened. Lifted up, perhaps, in a static electric charge, so perhaps it's related to that. But how bizarre is that? It definitely qualifies as a truly bizarre encounter and a close encounter of the second kind. And now let's move to the next one. This one is again a really good example of this weird Oz effect, this eerie silence, the lack of traffic and other witnesses, though this one does involve another witness, and it's very strange. I call this one, "We Were Frozen in Time." This occurred one evening in June of 1978 in Phoenix, Arizona, in a very crowded residential suburb. And I wanted to include this case because the witness is so lucid. She describes this in such incredible detail. She's very obviously sincere and intelligent, and it's a very interesting encounter, which apparently does involve missing time as well. This case comes from APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, and was published in the April 1978 issue of the APRO Bulletin. It was around 9 p.m. one evening in May or June of 1963, not 1978, 1963, as a mother and her 2 children had taken a walk and were returning to their home in residential Phoenix, Arizona. And as they reached the 1100 block of East Portland Street near the intersection of 12th Street, not far from their home, you can see it here, this is when they saw a strange craft which was hovering right next to someone's home. And I'll just quote the witness directly. As she says, "I found it difficult to believe that anything that size and shape could maneuver itself into a position so close to the house. It was absolutely silent. My chief concern was for the children, that they not be frightened, but I myself was severely shaken, in fact, terrified. I'm sure this was because, whatever it was, was so close, not more than 18 to 20 feet from me, and roughly 15 to 18 feet from the ground. The object itself was round, with 3 concentric circular rings, lessening in size from the outer edge to the center. It was exceptionally beautiful, and about the size of a compact car, perhaps slightly larger. I can't adequately describe the whiteness and the brilliance. There aren't any words for it. The lines of the craft were clearly drawn, except for one specific area. Here, the intense glow and luminescence made it impossible to describe anything. It was kind of a rim-like halo, and the glow seemed to radiate within. The top of the craft was completely white and smooth, and appeared flat. Though it was very bright white, the bottom was dark and appeared even flatter. The bottom appeared to be dull metal, medium to dark gray in color, with some kind of tube-like protrusion visible at an angle to the left side. So according to the witness, this craft had no windows, but there was no doubt in her mind that this was clearly a craft of some kind, and as she said, an unidentified aerial object. She felt rooted to the spot and just stared at it in absolute astonishment and some fear. And as strange as its appearance was, the weirdness had only just begun, because it was around this time she noticed what researchers have come to term the Oz effect. As the witness says, the eerie aspect was the absolute silence, as the thing just hung there in space, stationary for a few moments, after which it began to waver slightly, or quiver would be a better word. The wavering motion made me fearful of a possible hypnotic influence. Not far from the craft, on the left side of the front lawn, stood a middle-aged man holding a hose. He was in shadow, dressed in work clothes, and looked fairly ordinary. The area was quite dark. The only light was from the object reflecting upwards and a nearby streetlight. I was on the verge of saying, "Sir, do you see what I see?" But I could not speak. He paid no attention to the craft, nor to me. All of this occurred in less than 1 minute, or so it seemed. I lost all track of time. It seemed as if all life had stopped, except for the 3 of us, as if we were somehow frozen in time. Even the sound of insects could no longer be heard. Though normally the neighborhood was overrun with dogs and cats, there were none at the time of the sighting. It was as if everything had suddenly stopped or been suspended in time. I saw no autos in motion. I knew I had to get away quickly, as I had the distinct feeling something might happen to us. I was more than a little agitated, and mainly concerned for the safety of my children, because I felt we were somehow being observed. Now it was at this point that the witness was so overwhelmed with the strangeness of the situation that she managed to break free of her trance and get away from this object. But she then found that the encounter was affecting her emotionally in ways she did not expect. As the witness says, "When I first sighted the object, I only thought, 'My God, what is that?' I wanted to run, but could not. I was able to walk away, and my feeling of fear gave way to a kind of euphoria. I was suddenly happy, and I can't explain why. I was very much afraid during the encounter. Upon leaving the scene, I felt a sense of euphoria, and finally, sadness. When I reached home, it seemed very late, later than it should have been, and I sent the children to bed. I pushed open the screen door because I wanted to go back, but still I was somehow afraid. I knew the UFO would be gone, and I had this feeling of sadness and depression." Just amazing, the way this witness describes this UFO being so close to it. The missing time aspect, this other gentleman watering his plants, not even paying any attention to the UFO, makes me wonder about that. I mean, I have no answers to why he wouldn't be more excited to see this UFO, unless maybe he didn't even see it. I don't know. The emotional reaction to this witness is also interesting, being so fearful, and yet at the end of this encounter, feeling this wave of sadness and depression. Very unusual. I think it does point towards the very strong possibility of an onboard encounter, or more than she fully remembers. Because, again, she did say when she got home she was surprised to see that it was so late. Missing time can often be seamless. People just don't know. So I've come to realize that whenever anyone has a very close encounter within a couple of 100 feet, the chances of this being a much more extensive encounter go way, way up. Now let's move to the next case. Again, a really unusual case with some aspects to it that are very difficult to explain. This is another one you probably haven't heard before. I call this one a timely UFO encounter. This occurred on March 27, 1979. This is in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts. This is on the island of Martha's Vineyard. Pretty heavily populated. This one is a bizarre one for sure. This case comes from MUFON field investigator Joseph Nyman, who was referred the case by Raymond Fowler. It came to his attention when the local police at Martha's Vineyard called him. The witness is Ed Brown. That's a pseudonym. He was 19 years old at the time of his encounter. It was 10 p.m. on March 27, 1979, as he drove north along the Edgartown Oak Bluffs Road, right along the eastern shoreline of Martha's Vineyard. You can see it here. And as he drove, he noticed an odd green glow behind the sand dunes on his right, and thought to himself that it must be people on the beach using glow sticks. But as he drove, this glow became brighter, and then his radio started to emit a, quote, low-frequency hum. So he reached a point in the road where his view was no longer obstructed by the sand dunes, and then was amazed to see a luminous green cylindrical-shaped object with rounded ends floating on the water about 200 feet away. He immediately stopped the car and watched from the driver's seat as this object rose up out of the water. And as it got so high that his car roof blocked his view, he exited the car so he could keep viewing it. He said that the object was so bright that it was illuminating both the water and the beach below it, and then this object began to move, increasing in speed. Ed recalled that he had a 12-volt flashlight in his car, so he started to reach into the car, but to his surprise, he was suddenly paralyzed, unable to move any part of his body except his head. So he just watched this object as it continued to rise upwards and out of sight. Now Ed estimated that the entire encounter lasted about 6 minutes, though when he later reenacted it in the presence of researcher Joseph Nyman, they lowered the estimate down to about 2 minutes, though to Ed he said it seemed much longer. Now impressed by this event, Ed immediately drove to the Oak Bluffs police station, you can see it here, and reported the sighting. Joseph Nyman spoke with the officer who took the report, and he saw that this was logged in at 10:30 p.m., which verifies the time, and the officer said that Ed was unusually excited and somewhat frightened, which surprised him because he knew Ed. Ed himself was in fact an auxiliary police officer. Now there's a slight discrepancy of time here, because Ed knew that the sighting occurred at 10 p.m. as he was listening to the radio at the time. The drive to the station takes only 10 minutes, and this sighting was no longer than 6 minutes, so there's about a 15 to possibly 25 minutes of time that is unaccounted for. There was one final mystery. At the time of the encounter, Ed was wearing a calendar watch that was malfunctioning. It was reading 3 days ahead of normal time and was running consistently too fast. But following the encounter, this watch, which was a manual Timex watch, was now not only reading the correct date, it stopped running fast. So it looked as if the encounter had somehow not only corrected the date on the watch, but fixed the watch itself. They did test the watch with a compass to see if it was magnetized, and it showed that no, it had not been magnetized. But as Joseph Nyman, the researcher, writes, the most puzzling aspect of this case, then and still now, is the watch correction issue. A lot of these UFO cases display weird time effects, whether it's missing time. I've talked to people who had essentially added time, got to their location far earlier than they should have, or people who have an onboard encounter that lasts for hours, and yet they were returned minutes after the encounter. So there's all kinds of things going on here that we don't fully understand. That's why I wanted to include this encounter, because the whole time aspect of UFO encounters is very puzzling. So many questions still to be answered about what's going on here. Now let's move to the next case, which I call completely spellbound. This occurred on April 9, 1993 in Braunschweig, Germany. This is a multiple witness case. This one you may have heard of, I don't know, but it did receive considerable publicity. But I wanted to include it because this witness is very credible, being a military officer, and there were multiple witnesses as well. And very, very close up sighting with some incredible physiological effects. I mean, really the entire range, from animal reactions to electromagnetic disturbances to physiological effects to landing traces. So it's the kind of case that is truly undeniable. This case comes from German researcher Dr. Peter Hartwig, the founder of Die UFO. This is the German UFO investigation group, and it originally appeared in the Dugoforum Journal number 11, but also appeared in the winter 1996 issue of the Flying Saucer Review and in several other publications. It's become quite well known. Regarding the witness in this case, researcher Peter Hartwig says, "What he had to tell me was more astounding than science fiction. This case involves two primary witnesses, Erwin Lohr and his wife. Erwin was 72 years old at the time of his encounter and was living with his family in Braunschweig. This is a heavily populated city in central Germany. Now, he's a former fighter pilot and an accomplished artist. It was shortly after midnight on April 9, 1993, that Erwin woke up to an unusual stabbing pain at the base of his spine. He didn't think much of it, just took a painkiller and went back to bed. But before he could fall back asleep, something very strange happened that not only shocked him, but woke up his wife. As he says, suddenly we heard a clear humming sound coming from the sky. After 3 or 4 seconds, this noise, which seemed metallic, as though produced by a centrifugal force, grew louder. And then, through the bedroom window, we saw a bright, round, shining object, stationary, at a height of some 10 meters or so above the birch trees to the east. Our bedroom in the terrace outside was lit by a bluish-white color, like neon lighting. Being a former fighter pilot, I wanted, of course, to see what was going on. But when I tried to stand up, I found that I couldn't move. And with my wife, it was just the same. We were both totally paralyzed. Also, our 2 kittens, which sleep on the foot of the bed, were both sitting there bolt upright and looking as though turned to stone. Meanwhile, our bedroom window was being bathed on and off in a bright yellow beam of light, apparently coming down from above. Now, Erwin was more annoyed at not being able to move than he was afraid, though his wife reports that she herself was terrified. Erwin had the impression that the occupants of the craft were seeking him personally. As he said, "Absolutely, for it was hovering right there beside my bedroom window, as though they knew exactly where I was. It shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, white, green, red, yellow. The cupola was a bright shining silver. The underside had 3 colored apertures and a central light. The eerie apparition lasted altogether about 40 seconds or so, and then the vivid light ended abruptly. Then, some 30 or 40 seconds later, we saw the UFO fly over our bedroom window in a westerly direction and vanish. Simultaneously, the paralysis ended for both of us. My wife was too upset to sleep anymore, and so was I. Now, Erwin's wife had, as Erwin says, a thorough fit of the shakes. And while it seemed as though the encounter was over, in truth, many more high strangeness events were about to occur. Because as Erwin says, about a half hour later, we heard the same sound again, coming from the other direction. Our bedroom has windows on 2 sides, so we got a full view of the UFO for the first time. From a distance of about 300 meters, we watched it flying straight towards us. We heard the same sounds as before, and for about 6 seconds we could see its shape clearly. Then, just as about the disk, which I estimate was about 10 meters wide, was nearly right over us, something quite unbelievable happened. It simply dissolved into thin air. Between 1/10 of a second and another, it was gone, without any transition. Now, being an artist, Erwin immediately produced a few sketches of the craft, But still, even more strange events were soon to happen, because it was the next day at 4 p.m. that their TV set started acting very strangely. It emitted a bright flash of light and made this very loud crackling sound, and 1 hour later, their two other TV sets that were downstairs emitted what he called, quote, phenomenal discharges. Their computer also shut down by itself, and then at 10 p.m., something even more bizarre happened. As Irwin says, a tremendous banging started up inside our wardrobe, as though someone was shut in there. But despite all our efforts and our searching, we could find absolutely no reason for the noise. And every time we opened the wardrobe, the din stopped. On and off, the eerie happenings went on for a further 8 weeks and disturbed us badly. Now, another apparently related effect was that Irwin continued to experience a strange pain in his lower spine, and after a week of dealing with it, he finally used a mirror to examine the area of the pain, and this is when he discovered 2 red marks at the very base of his spine. He went to the doctor, who said that he saw what looked like 2 black spots below the skin where the marks were. The doctor applied some ointment and referred Irwin to have a CAT scan. And as Irwin says, but before I was able to go there, 2 little black lens-shaped things came out of my back. I put them away carefully to show them to the doctor, but by the second day following, they had simply disappeared. Now, Irwin had no idea how to explain these objects or where they went, and when researcher Peter Hatwig mentioned the possibility of an onboard encounter, Irwin was absolutely shocked. He had never heard of such a thing, but he later researched it and considered trying hypnosis, but so far has not done so. And there were a few final things that happened. After being interviewed by reporters and sharing his encounter publicly, it was published in the local newspaper, and Irwin was then contacted by about 25 different people, including an entire bowling team, all of whom told him that they had also witnessed what was apparently the same object on that night. All of them refused to go public as eyewitnesses out of fear of ridicule. And finally, there was one bit of evidence. In addition to the weird electromagnetic disturbances, the animal reactions, the physiological effects, there were apparent ground traces caused by the close proximity of the craft. As Dr. Peter Hatwig says, the birch tree below the UFO had been burnt in the episode, and indeed has not fully recovered today, as its leaves are turning curly and falling already, although it is still summer. Edwin Lohr showed me the spot. Now, this was 2 years after the encounter. There you go, another case that raises, I think, more questions than it answers. My main question is, what the heck is this UFO doing hovering right outside of this guy's house in a downtown city location? It's crazy. I do think that there's probably deeper levels of contact here, given that he was apparently implanted and all the weird kind of poltergeist-like effects going on. It's crazy. These kinds of cases, I think, comprise a good portion of UFO encounters and don't receive the attention they deserve. It's amazing to me that we have congressional hearings and they're still talking pretty much primarily about sightings. Yes, to some extent crash retrievals. But there are so many cases where people are having very close contact. And they're not talking about that, which is puzzling to me because I think this is where we can get a lot of the answers. This is where the data is. We can learn so much from these kinds of cases. And for that reason alone, I think we need to take them seriously. And again, that's the kind of case that you just can't deny with all this evidence. So now let's move to the last and final case in this compilation. This one to me is probably the most profound and unusual. I'm not sure it would even qualify as a UFO encounter, though it was reported as such. So I am including it here because it definitely could be a UFO encounter, but it might have another explanation. I call this one, My Body Was No Longer Mine. This occurred on February 2nd, 2002 in Arlington, Washington. And thank God this witness had another witness with her. So it's a multiple witness encounter because if this had happened to her alone, I think it probably would have caused her to question her sanity. That's how unusual this case is, as we'll see. This very unusual encounter, yes, is very difficult to categorize, but it is certainly unexplained. The witness is anonymous, so I'll call her Tina. And again, thankfully, Tina did have another witness, her former boyfriend. It was around 7 a.m. on the morning of February 2nd, 2002, as Tina drove to his one-bedroom apartment located in Arlington, Washington. They were planning to go out for breakfast, but instead found themselves in his kitchen having a deep philosophical conversation about the subject of religion and how it's helped or hindered them. The kitchen was kind of shadowed and dark, so Tina asked if she could open the window, and her boyfriend said, "Go ahead." It was at that moment that Tina's life changed forever. As Tina says, "I pulled the blinds away and was instantly blinded by this very white, bright light. Yet it didn't make me squint to look at it. As I turned back to face him 2.5 to 3 feet away, I suddenly felt this sensation of being suspended in animation. I quit feeling the floor under my feet and everything was white and hazy. But I could still see my boyfriend standing in front of me. My body was no longer mine, and I somehow leaned really far forward as I was close to his face. Then I slanted back again at the same angle, but I hadn't moved my feet or legs as I would have done naturally to catch myself from falling. But I didn't. Right after that, I saw a portal. It was about 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide. It was liquid looking, like water. I don't know if it came over me or I into it, but there was a sound when I went through that I'll never forget. The white light was brighter, and I still felt suspended in animation. Suddenly there was this white ball of light coming around me. It was the size of a basketball, very white and very bright. It came to my torso and began to push itself into my body. I could feel it push and then pop through into me all the way. It bounced around inside of me a few times, and then I began to feel it trying to exit on my left side. It popped out completely, rolled around me a few times, then took off fast. Before it left, though, it put me back down on my feet, but it was at such a backward angle that I had to put my foot back so I didn't fall down, and I could. As the orb of light exited Tina's body and took off, it then emitted a shower of golden light all over her. Tina was so stunned and dumbfounded that all she could do was stand there, and finally she turned to her boyfriend. And as Tina says, "Now that I was back in my senses, and my body, so to speak, I just asked myself, WTF just happened?" I looked up at my boyfriend, and his usual brown skin was white in his face. His jaw was open, and he looked as astonished as I did. And I asked him, "WTF just happened?" "I don't know," he told her. And as Tina says, "So we sat down and tried to relax, but we were both so shaken up that we began to go into shock. I had to know what he saw, so I asked him. And he said as I drew up the kitchen blinds, this golden white orb came from behind me and lit up my red hair golden. He said it was beautiful, like I was an angel. He saw it enter my right torso. He also saw it while it was within me, too, and saw it come out. Now, in our talking, we're really starting to shake uncontrollably in shock. It was just so hard to even attempt to understand this. So the encounter left both of them with more questions than answers. As Tina says, was this spiritual or was it an ET encounter? She doesn't know, but the effect of the encounter on her has been long-lasting and ongoing. As she says, "I feel like I've had information downloaded into me. I got a message too that, quote, we humans often cannot tell the difference between angels and aliens." She says, "I've had many knowings where I just know stuff that I haven't studied. I became in tune with spirit and have acted as a medium for many friends. But now that seems gone. The experience did not scare me. It gave me hope. And I feel that I've got family elsewhere. The entity that came to me was a benefit to my life. It was so white and bright. It was just pure energy. They don't need a body, just light. It showed me what my mission was. Visions and dreams, etc. I'm a very lucid dreamer. Fun, but terrifying as well." There you go. Definitely a close encounter of some kind, and clearly did affect the witness. Perhaps it's a spiritual encounter involving some kind of perhaps angelic entity. I don't know. It's very hard to categorize some of these cases. Again, she did report it to a UFO center, so I'm including it here. And I have heard of similar cases of people seeing orbs and having them enter into their body. I know of one case where that happened to a gentleman and he was healed. So this does seem to be intentional. And yet there's this weird random quality to it. Her lifting up the blinds, and that's when it happened. Which makes me wonder what if she hadn't turned around and opened the kitchen blinds? Would this not have occurred? Or was this all planned and preordained? Very hard to say. I also find it super interesting that this incident occurred when these two were having a very profound and philosophical conversation about religion and God and this kind of thing. Because that is a pattern we see in a number of these cases. An encounter occurs at a sort of pivotal moment in a person's life. I don't know. There you go. 10 cases, close encounters of the second kind. I think you'll agree that these are all truly fascinating and have some really interesting aspects to them that we have yet to fully understand, and that makes them profoundly important. I've said it so many times, but I think these UFO encounters have so much to teach us that offers us an opportunity to learn so much about what's going on beyond Earth. It's clear to me that we are not alone. How do you explain these cases? If these aren't craft, what are they? Something is obviously going on here that deserves much more study, much more attention. And I know a lot of you out there are having these encounters, because this is another thing I keep repeating, but it's so important. 1 in 100 people maybe report their encounter to perhaps MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, or NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center. And that's just in the United States. Between those two, they have some 200 to 300,000 documented cases. And I'm not even talking about QFOS, or NICAP, or APRO, or the many, many other UFO reporting centers in the United States alone. So yeah, millions of documented cases. There's no doubt this subject is real. So I'm glad it's finally getting some attention at least. And we're moving beyond the skepticism, the ridiculing, and the gaslighting of UFO witnesses. Because definitely it's no joke to those who have this experience. So that's it for today. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate you guys watching. I'll be doing more humanoid cases, of course. But again, close encounters of the second kind are just as important. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you're doing well. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Don't believe me. Do your own research. This is going on. Most important of all, keep having fun. And I'll see you next week. Bye for now.